You wonder whether the avoidant has moved on completely, whether they think about you anymore, whether you occupy any space in their awareness months or years after the relationship ended. You observe their apparent ease moving forward, their calm external presentation, their lack of contact that suggests you have faded from their concern the way previous relationships faded easily once the avoidance defensive structure processed those endings and filed them away as closed chapters. Yet specific conditions existed in your relationship and in how that relationship ended that prevent the avoidant from getting over you in the way they got over previous partners, that keep you active in their psychological landscape when others have been successfully dismissed and forgotten, that make you the relationship they cannot process completely or release fully regardless of how much time passes or how many new connections they form. You are the one they will never get over, not because you were perfect or because the relationship was ideal, but because specific elements of your dynamic and your departure created psychological effects. Their defensive structure cannot resolve using the usual mechanisms that worked for processing previous relationship endings. You exposed the cost of their patterns in ways previous partners did not expose, making their defended limitations visible and consequential in ways they cannot forget or rationalize away. You walked away first before they were psychologically ready to end things, breaking their pattern of controlling relationship endings and leaving them with activated feelings they could not complete their usual deactivation process on. You possess specific combination of qualities that met their needs uniquely well, creating standard they compare all future partners to and consistently find those partners lacking in ways that keep you present as the ideal they lost. The relationship ended before their defensive deactivation completed its usual arc, leaving the ending feeling premature and unfinished in ways that prevent the closure their defensive structure requires to fully release previous partners. These elements combine to create a situation where you remain psychologically active for the avoidant across years or decades, where they think about you when they do not think about previous partners, where they cannot fully move on despite appearing externally to have moved on, where you occupy permanent space in their awareness as the one who got away, or the one they lost, or the one they compare everyone else to unfavorably. Yet the critical recognition you must maintain is that the avoidant never getting over you does not mean they will do the work to deserve you back, does not indicate they have developed capacity to show up adequately if reconnection occurred, does not suggest they have healed their defended patterns or gained insight about their limitations. They can carry you as permanent psychological presence while maintaining the same defensive structure that cost them the relationship with you, can think about you constantly while remaining incapable of vulnerable pursuit, can compare everyone unfavorably to you while lacking capacity to build with you what their idealization suggests they want. You are permanent impact on their psychology without being catalyst for their growth. You are the one they will never get over and the one they will never be capable of choosing adequately unless they do intensive therapeutic work that most avoidants never undertake regardless of how much losing you affects them. You're the one who exposed the cost of their patterns in ways they can't forget. The avoidant maintained their defended patterns across their entire relationship history without facing genuine, lasting consequences that made those patterns unsustainable. Previous partners complained about the withdrawal, expressed hurt about the emotional unavailability, communicated frustration about the inability to commit or prioritize adequately, yet these previous partners continued accepting the patterns despite their complaints, continued remaining available despite their expressed hurt, continued investing despite inadequate reciprocation. This continued acceptance, despite verbal objections, taught the avoidant that their patterns are sustainable, that complaints are noise that can be ignored without real cost, that people will tolerate their defended limitations indefinitely if given occasional minimal gestures that maintain hope. The pattern consequences remained theoretical rather than actual. Previous partners threatened to leave but stayed, established boundaries but failed to enforce them, expressed that patterns were unacceptable but continued accepting them. You differed fundamentally by exposing the actual cost of their patterns through implementing real consequences rather than theoretical consequences. You did not just complain about their withdrawal, you left when withdrawal became intolerable, demonstrating their withdrawal costs, them relationships with people who matter. You did not just express hurt about emotional unavailability, you removed yourself from relationship where needs remained chronically unmet. Showing their unavailability costs them partners who require emotional intimacy. You did not just communicate frustration about lack of prioritization, you stopped making yourself available to someone who would not prioritize you adequately, proving their failure to prioritize costs them access to people they want access to. These real consequences made their patterns cost visible and concrete, rather than theoretical and abstract. The exposure of actual costs created psychological crisis for the avoidant that previous relationship endings did not create, because previous endings allowed them to maintain comfortable narrative that their patterns were acceptable, or at worst were unfortunate limitations, partners should accommodate. Your departure through enforced consequences destroyed this comfortable narrative by demonstrating definitively that their patterns are not acceptable to adequate partners, that defended limitations have real relationship costs, that people with standards will leave rather than indefinitely accommodating patterns that harm them. This destroyed narrative cannot be rebuilt using the avoidant's usual defensive mechanisms because your departure provided undeniable evidence that contradicts their preferred story about their patterns being tolerable. The cost exposure particularly impacts the avoidant because it came from you specifically, someone they valued more than they valued previous partners, someone whose accommodation they relied upon more extensively, someone whose loss affects them more significantly. Previous partners who left may have exposed costs, but those costs felt manageable because the avoidant did not value those partners enough for the loss to create genuine crisis. Your departure exposed costs that feel unmanageable because losing you cost them something they recognize as valuable even within their defended structure. Your specific understanding of them, your particular accommodation of their patterns, your unique combination of qualities that met their needs better than previous partners met those needs. The cost you exposed is not abstract loss of generic partner, it is concrete loss of specific person whose value they recognize, even if they could not adequately demonstrate that recognition while you were available. The avoidant cannot forget this cost exposure because they encounter reminders constantly as they attempt to form new connections. Each new person they meet lacks your specific qualities that made you uniquely compatible with their defended needs. Each new relationship requires them to rebuild understanding and accommodation you provided that new partners are not willing to provide as readily. Each new attempt at intimacy confronts them with reality that finding someone who accepts their patterns as extensively as you accepted them while possessing your other valuable qualities is statistically unlikely. These constant reminders keep your cost exposure lesson active rather than allowing it to fade into forgotten past. They cannot escape recognition that their patterns cost them someone irreplaceable, that losing you was consequence of their defended limitations, that your departure proved their patterns have costs they cannot avoid facing. The cost exposure also cannot be rationalized away using the avoidant's typical defensive mechanisms. Typically, the avoidant manages ended relationships by focusing on former partner's flaws. The relationship ended because that partner was too needy, too demanding, not right fit. Yet this rationalization fails with you because your departure came from position of strength rather than desperation, from enforced standards rather than excessive needs, from clear assessment that their patterns were inadequate rather than from unreasonable demands. The avoidant cannot dismiss you as too needy because you were not begging them to stay, you left. They cannot characterize you as too demanding because you were not demanding they change. You were protecting yourself from patterns you would not continue tolerating. They cannot frame you as wrong fit because the fit was adequate until their patterns made it untenable. Your cost exposure came with dignity and clarity that prevents defensive dismissal. Understanding that you expose the cost of their patterns in ways they cannot forget allows you to recognize why you remain in the avoidance awareness when previous partners have faded. You taught them lesson about consequences that their defensive structure cannot process away or rationalize into comfortable narrative. You are permanent reminder that their patterns cost them something valuable. Permanent evidence that defended limitations have real relationship costs. permanent counterexample to their preferred belief that adequate people will tolerate their patterns indefinitely. This permanent status in their awareness reflects the indelible nature of the lesson you taught through your departure. Yet, this lesson existing permanently in their awareness does not indicate they will apply this lesson through doing healing work to change their patterns. They can carry the lesson about what their patterns cost them while continuing those patterns in future relationships, can remember you as the one they lost through their limitations while maintaining the limitations that cost them you. They'll never get over losing someone who actually walked away first. The avoidant maintains specific pattern across their entire relationship history where they controlled the endings, they determined when relationships had run their course, they decided when their patterns made continuation unsustainable for them, they managed the timing of when connection would diminish or terminate. They positioned themselves as the person who left or who created conditions that forced the other person to leave while they maintained psychological position of being the one who chose the ending. This control over endings served crucial defensive function by protecting them from experiencing abandonment, by ensuring they were never in vulnerable position of being left, by maintaining their sense of power through their capacity to determine relationship outcomes. Even when previous partners technically ended relationships, the avoidance patterns had created the conditions making ending inevitable. They maintained indirect control that preserved their defended position. You shattered this lifelong pattern by actually walking away first, by leaving while they were not yet psychologically ready for the relationship to end, by making the decision to terminate connection before they had completed their usual internal process of deactivation and preparation for ending. Your departure occurred on your timeline according to your assessment, rather than occurring on their timeline when they had decided relationship should conclude. This reversal, where you became the one who left, the one who controlled the ending, the one who determined relationship would not continue, created unprecedented experience in the avoidance relational history. They were left rather than leaving, they were abandoned rather than abandoning. They lost control over the outcome rather than managing the outcome according to their defended needs. The experience of being left first rather than leaving penetrates the avoidance defensive structure in ways that typical relationship endings do not penetrate, because typical endings occurred within their control, whereas your departure occurred entirely outside their control. They could not prevent your leaving, could not negotiate for more time, could not manage the ending to occur on terms that felt comfortable to their defended position. You took all control away by making definitive decision to remove yourself, leaving them experiencing the powerlessness and the vulnerability that their defensive structure developed specifically to avoid experiencing. This penetration of their defenses creates wound that does not heal using their usual mechanisms because the wound resulted from exactly the scenario their defenses were designed to prevent, being left by someone who mattered. The avoidant never gets over being left first because the experience contradicts their entire defended worldview about relationships and about themselves. Their defensive structure organized around belief that they are the one who determines relationship outcomes, that they maintain power through their capacity to withdraw or engage, that they will never be in vulnerable position of being the one who is left. Your walking away destroyed these organizing beliefs by demonstrating they do not control outcomes when the other person decides to leave, that they do not maintain power when someone removes themselves from their reach, that they can be left and abandoned despite their defended attempts to ensure this never happens. These destroyed beliefs cannot be rebuilt because your departure provided undeniable evidence that contradicts them. The permanence of never getting over being left first also stems from the avoidant's inability to gain psychological closure through their typical ending mechanisms. Typically, the avoidant achieves closure by completing their deactivation arc. They gradually withdraw until they feel finished with the relationship. They mentally process that relationship will not work until they reach acceptance. They prepare themselves psychologically for ending even if other person technically implements it. This completed internal process allows them to feel finished and to release previous partners without ongoing psychological entanglement. Your walking away occurred before they completed this arc. You left while they still had some activation toward you, while they had not fully decided relationship was over, while they were still in pattern of taking you for granted while assuming more time existed to determine what they wanted. The ending arrived before their internal completion, leaving them with feelings and process that remain unfinished and unresolved. The never getting over you because you walked away first manifests through specific ongoing psychological effects. They replay the ending, repeatedly analyzing what they could have done differently to prevent your departure. This replay keeps you actively present in their thoughts when previous relationships do not generate such obsessive processing. They experience intrusive thoughts about you that interrupt their daily functioning in ways previous partners do not intrude once those relationships ended within the avoidance control. They feel ongoing activation about you that their deactivation mechanisms cannot fully suppress because the relationship ended before deactivation completed. This persistent activation keeps emotional connection alive when emotional connections to previous partners have been successfully deactivated. They compare their current life without you to imagined alternative life where they had behaved adequately enough that you stayed. This comparative thinking keeps you present as the lost possibility when previous partners are simply past chapters without such comparative focus. Understanding that the avoidant will never get over losing someone who actually walked away first allows you to recognize why you occupy different psychological status than previous partners. You violated their defensive structure's core organizing principle by being the one who left, by taking control away from them, by making them experience the abandonment their defenses were designed to prevent. This violation creates a permanent mark that keeps you present in their awareness across years or decades when previous partners they left have faded easily from their concern. Yet this permanent psychological presence, reflecting your unique status as the one who walked away, does not indicate they have developed capacity to handle your return differently, does not suggest they could build sustainable relationship if reconnection occurred, does not mean they have addressed the defended patterns that motivated your departure. They can never get over being left by you while maintaining all the defensive limitations that made leaving you the necessary choice. You became the standard they compare everyone else to and find lacking. The avoidant moves through their post-relationship life, attempting to form new connections, to build new relationships, to find new partners who might provide what you provided while being more compatible with their defended limitations. Yet every new person they encounter suffers through comparison to you, measured against standard you established in ways that reveal deficiencies where you possessed specific qualities the avoidant valued even within their defended structure. The new person lacks your particular understanding of their psychology, lacks your specific patience with their patterns, lacks your unique combination of qualities that match their defended needs in ways no one else has matched before or will likely match again. This constant unfavorable comparison keeps you present as the ideal they lost, as the standard they measure others against, as the benchmark that others consistently fail to reach. You became the standard through specific ways you met the avoidant's defended needs uniquely well despite their inadequate reciprocation. You understood their patterns without judgment in ways that created psychological safety they rarely experience. You saw their defended behavior as stemming from wounds rather than as malicious cruelty. You grasped their psychology without requiring extensive explanation. You recognized their struggles with vulnerability without punishing them for those struggles. This understanding allowed them to feel known in ways their defenses usually prevent. You saw beneath their defended presentation to their actual wound itself, and you did not reject what you saw there. This experience of being understood, despite defended limitations, is rare for avoidance, and becomes standard they cannot find replicated with new partners. You also provided specific accommodation of their patterns that made relationship work despite their defended limitations. You gave them space when they withdrew without making them feel guilty. You tolerated their emotional unavailability longer than reasonable people tolerated. You worked around their inability to commit rather than requiring commitment as prerequisite. You adjusted your own needs extensively to match their limited capacity. This accommodation allowed them defended comfort they could not maintain in relationships with partners who have healthy boundaries and who require adequate reciprocation. New partners with self-respect will not provide this level of accommodation. They establish boundaries the avoidant must respect. They require emotional availability. The avoidant struggles to provide. They demand prioritization. The avoidant resists giving. The contrast between your extensive accommodation and new partners' reasonable standards makes those new partners feel demanding or incompatible, even when their requirements are normal, healthy relationship expectations. You possessed combination of other qualities beyond understanding and accommodation that the avoidant valued. Perhaps your intelligence engaged them intellectually, your emotional stability provided grounding they lack internally, your life competence made their life function better, your specific personality traits meshed well with theirs, your physical attributes attracted them, your life circumstances made relationship logistically convenient. This unique combination is statistically difficult to replicate. Finding someone else who possesses your level of understanding and your willingness to accommodate and your other valuable qualities, and who remains willing to tolerate avoidant patterns, is unlikely. New partners might match one or two elements, but rarely match the complete package you represented. The standard you established operates most powerfully through the avoidance recognition that you tolerated their patterns extensively yet still left. This combination makes you unicorn in their relational history. Previous partners either left quickly when patterns became apparent, making them easy to dismiss as not understanding or not patient enough, or they tolerated indefinitely, making them easy to take for granted. You occupied a rare middle ground where you understood them deeply and accommodated extensively, and still determined their patterns were inadequate enough to motivate your departure. This combination created cognitive dissonance the avoidant cannot resolve. If you understood them so well and accommodated so extensively yet still left, their patterns must be more problematic than they want to acknowledge. If someone as patient and understanding as you determined they were an inadequate partner, they must be more inadequate than they want to face. The unfavorable comparisons manifest through the avoidance experience with new partners, highlighting what those partners lack relative to you. New partner requires more communication than you required. The avoidant thinks about how you understood without extensive explanation. New partner establishes boundaries around their patterns. The avoidant remembers how you accommodated without establishing such limiting boundaries. New partner expresses normal needs. The avoidant compares these needs to your modified, minimized needs and finds new partner demanding. New partner shows normal emotional expression. The avoidant contrasts this with your regulated expression and finds new partner overwhelming. Every difference between you and new partners positions you favorably in comparison, even when the differences reflect new partner's health rather than deficiency. The avoidant will never get over you as standard, because finding someone who replicates what you provided while accepting their patterns is statistically improbable. Because the comparison process keeps you actively present as the ideal they measure others against. Because each new inadequate comparison reinforces their recognition that they lost something uniquely valuable that their patterns are unlikely to allow them to find again. Yet understanding they will never get over you as standard requires recognizing this permanent comparison does not indicate they learned from losing you, does not suggest they would behave differently if you returned, does not mean they have developed capacity to reciprocate adequately what you provided. They can hold you as permanent standard while maintaining defended patterns that made relationship with you unsustainable, can compare everyone unfavorably to you while lacking capacity to build with you what their idealization suggests they value. The relationship ended before their deactivation completed, leaving it permanently unfinished. The avoidant processes relationship endings through specific psychological mechanism of deactivation, where they gradually shut down their attachment feelings, progressively withdraw their emotional investment, systematically minimize their need for the connection until they reach internal state of feeling finished with the relationship and ready to release the person. This deactivation arc typically unfolds across extended time, during which the avoidant creates increasing distance. They withdraw emotionally while maintaining some physical presence. They reduce contact frequency and depth. They redirect their attention and energy toward other people or pursuits. They mentally rehearse life without the person until that imagined life feels comfortable and desirable. By the time relationship actually ends, the avoidant has completed most of their internal deactivation work, allowing them to move forward feeling psychologically finished, even if the other person is still emotionally engaged. Your walking away disrupted this typical deactivation process by occurring before the avoidant completed their internal arc. You left while they still maintained some attachment activation, while they had not fully withdrawn their emotional investment, while they were still in their pattern of taking you for granted rather than preparing to lose you. The relationship ended at a point when their deactivation was incomplete. They had not yet reached the internal state of being finished with you, had not yet mentally processed that relationship would not work, had not yet prepared themselves for your absence. Your departure forced sudden ending when their psychological process indicated continuing relationship with option to withdraw further if needed. The incomplete deactivation leaves the relationship permanently unfinished in the avoidance psychology because they cannot complete their deactivation process on relationship that no longer exists. Deactivation requires continued contact that allows gradual withdrawal. The avoidant needs to be around you while feeling less and less attached, needs to observe you while caring progressively less, needs to interact while investing decreasingly until they reach point of internal completion where they feel done. Your absence prevents this continued contact that deactivation requires, freezing their attachment at whatever level existed when you left, rather than allowing that attachment to complete its arc toward deactivation. They remain stuck with unprocessed, activated feelings they cannot deactivate without access to you. The unfinished quality manifests through the avoidant's inability to achieve psychological closure about the relationship using their typical mechanisms. Typically, they achieve closure by completing deactivation. They reach a point where they genuinely feel finished, genuinely do not want continuation, genuinely have released their attachment. This completed process allows them to file the relationship away as concluded chapter they can stop thinking about and stop processing. Your departure before deactivation completed prevents this filing away because the relationship feels unfinished, because their attachment did not complete its natural arc, because they lack the sense of completion that typically allows them to fully release previous partners. The permanently unfinished status keeps you psychologically active in ways that completed relationships are not active. Completed relationships that ended after full deactivation occupy minimal psychological space. The avoidant thinks about them rarely, experiences no ongoing activation about them, feels no need to continue processing them. Your unfinished relationship occupies ongoing psychological space. The avoidant thinks about you regularly in ways that feel intrusive, experiences continued activation that deactivation mechanisms cannot fully suppress, feels ongoing need to process and analyze relationship that never reached psychological completion. This ongoing activity across years reflects the unfinished nature that your departure timing created. The incomplete deactivation also prevents the avoidant from creating the dismissive narrative they typically construct about ended relationships. Typically, they complete deactivation by focusing progressively on former partners' flaws, by emphasizing incompatibilities, by building narrative about why relationship was not right. This narrative building requires time and contact that allows them to gather evidence supporting dismissive story. Your departure before they built this narrative leaves them without the dismissive framework that would allow comfortable release. They cannot easily dismiss you because they did not have time to construct dismissive narrative. Cannot focus primarily on your flaws because you left before they completed the mental work of emphasizing those flaws over your qualities. Cannot tell themselves story about incompatibility when you left while relationships still functioned in ways that met their needs even if inadequately meeting yours. The permanently unfinished quality also stems from your departure creating questions the avoidant cannot answer through their typical psychological processing. In completed relationships, they reached point of certainty that relationship would not work, that person was not right for them, that ending was correct decision. Your departure before they reach such certainty leaves them with unanswered questions. Would the relationship have worked if they had behaved differently? Was ending premature because they had not yet reached their decision point? Did they lose something that could have been viable if they had modified their patterns? These unanswerable questions keep the relationship psychologically active because the avoidant cannot achieve the certainty about ending that would allow complete release.